Hello everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com, or Scott Steiner from Cultaholic.com here, back with a look at what happened at Impact Wrestling's Slammiversary, because, as you may have already guessed, I lost the predictions contest. I have to spend all week dressed as the champion of our hearts, Scotty Steiner. Anyway, let's take a look at what happened at Impact Slammiversary. One of the best Impact pay-per-views I can remember for a long, long time. Maybe even one of the best ones ever. Let's take a look at what all went down, and let's just get this over with. I'm so warm. So the show kicked off. I cannot take myself seriously. So the show kicked off with a big four-way match between four of the flippiest guys on the roster, and it was a wise decision. Fenix, Johnny Impact, Petey Williams, who was replacing the injured Rich Swann, and New Japan roster member Taiji Ishimori, a member, of course, of the Bullet Club. Too sweet. I can see myself in the camera. I can see how ridiculous I actually look. All in all, this was an excellent decision to open the show with. All four guys just tore the house down. They went out trying to impress everyone in the Toronto crowd. The Toronto crowd were, of course, behind the Canadian Petey Williams. He often went for the Canadian Destroyer, quite a lot in the match. But I think the MVP of the match for me was Fenix, who did an awesome job. He was flying everywhere. All the spots were crisp. Everyone's timing was really good. And generally, it was a very, very hot opener to the show. But it wasn't Fenix who won, nor was it Taiji Ishimori. It was actually the man himself, Johnny Impact. The finish came with all four guys hitting their big moves on each other in quick succession. I think it was in this sort of order, like Ishimori hit his 450 splash, then Petey Williams hit the Canadian Destroyer, then Fenix came off the top with a big stomp to him, and then Johnny Impact hit Starship Pain and picked up the victory, which I reckon puts him in number one contender contention for the X Division Championship. The match took place later on in the card, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, between Brian Cage and Matt Sydal. But this was a very, very hot opener. Great stuff. Great choice to go on first on the card, and it really got the crowd warmed up for what turned out to be an excellent night of wrestling. Next up, we had one of the matches I was more worried for on the card in terms of living up to the hype, particularly because it featured Allie, who, while she's a good, pure babyface character, she is one of the less experienced members of the Impact roster, but she was going against Tessa, Blanchard, a very experienced indie wrestler. So it was interesting to see how this one would go down, and to be honest, it actually exceeded my expectations by quite a fair distance. I was expecting this to be a fairly routine victory for Tessa Blanchard, but I think I've been conditioned by a lot of WWE pay-per-views that put on matches that could easily take place on a Raw or SmackDown, whereas in this show, every single match I can't imagine happening on a standard episode of Impact. Everyone raised their game a little bit, everyone elevated their game, and that included Tessa and Allie. Tessa picked up the victory, but Allie got a fair few near falls, which I was very surprised about. I wasn't expecting this match to be too competitive. I thought Allie might win with a cheeky roll-up or something like that, or Tessa would win just by dominating the whole match. But no, it was a very back and forth affair. Both women took pretty high risks, considering that it was only the second match on the card and it was following a big flippy match. So I was well impressed, and I think the right woman also picked up the victory in Tessa Blanchard. She's going to go on, and I'm sure potentially has a Knockouts Championship shot lined up for somewhere down the line. But for now, yes, she got the big heel victory and healed it up all the way to the back. Big sympathy for Allie as well. She did a great job considering her relative greenness in getting the crowd's sympathy and all that sort of thing. So lovely stuff. 2 for 2 in terms of impressive matches right off the bat. I look so I did that, and I can just see, I feel like George Michael in Arrested Development wearing this muscle suit. Next up, the first of 3 sort of hardcore themed matches on the card, a match between Tommy Dreamer and Eddie Edwards, who recently fell out when Eddie Edwards sort of turned heel because of his hatred for Sami Callihan. Tommy Dreamer was like his mentor and his friend, and Eddie Edwards turned against him and has been healing it up ever since. So yeah, this was pretty hardcore, as you'd expect from a Tommy Dreamer match, especially one billed as a House of Hardcore match. And it was really good. I thought it, wasn't the sharpest match on the card by any stretch of the imagination, but I still enjoyed it, particularly because of its positioning. If this had come in the midst of the other hardcore matches on the card, it really would have got lost in the shuffle and may well have been one of the weaker matches on the show. But as it turns out, because this was the first hardcore match and was maybe the weakest of the 3, it still stood out in its own unique way. Predictably, there were all the sort of ECW style hallmarks involved: baking trays, trash can lids, the kendo stick, which has been a key staple in this whole feud between Edwards and Dreamer, also made an appearance. And they took it to the outside a bit. What was the spot I'm trying to think of that happened? Yes, there was a guy in the crowd with a replica ECW championship. Dreamer took it from him, kissed it, held it aloft, went, yes, ECW. hit Eddie Edwards with it, and Eddie was busted open. It was a really nice moment and a really good callback to Tommy Dreamer's glory days in ECW. The finish came, and it was a bit of a controversial finish because, as they often say in wrestling, you shouldn't tease something for the crowd and then not give them it, but they kind of did that. Basically, Dreamer got a table from under the ring and squirted lighter fluid all over it. Everyone was like, oh, this lighter fluid's going quite like all over the place. It was landing on both guys' clothes. I thought, when he sets this alight, there's a very real danger of both guys catching a light themselves, like their shirts would catch fire. But in the end, the flames never materialized. It never happened because he dropped the lighter when Eddie Edwards gave him a low blow, and then Eddie Edwards hit the Boston Knee Party, or a chair-assisted Boston Knee Party, to pick up the victory. So I didn't know what to think of this, because when the tease of fire was there, I kind of really wanted to see it. But at the same time, it was an entertaining match, if a little bit of a trashy one, but I didn't really mind. It was a good variety. The first 3 matches on the show, we had a flippy match to start off with, then a really well-worked match between Allie and Tessa Blanchard, and then finally a hardcore match. So the first opening 3 matches of the show were really good in terms of difference. Nothing was the same, and Eddie Edwards was the right guy to pick up the victory. After the match, interestingly as well, there was kind of a passing of the torch ceremony where Tommy Dreamer sort of handed Eddie Edwards the kendo stick as if to say, right, you're the new hardcore guy now, go for it. But then Eddie Edwards' wife was there as well, looking a bit perturbed by the whole thing. So Edwards, I guess, is not heel anymore, more of a tweener. We don't really know where he's going to go after winning the respect of Tommy Dreamer. Next up, the X Division Championship match between the reigning champion Matt Sydal and the challenger Brian Cage. Brian Cage, obviously quite a unique challenger, given that the X Division typically features smaller guys, not big built machines like myself and Brian Cage. Both guys in this match did a really good job of establishing the little versus large dynamic. Sydal was getting pretty nifty reversals and stuff like that, ducking out the way of Cage's big strikes at every opportunity, whereas whenever Cage caught him, Matt Sydal was bumping like an absolute legend to put over his opponent. There was a really particularly impressive spot as well, where Sydal jumped off the top for looking for a blockbuster or something like that. He jumped off and he went upside down with his head facing the canvas, and Brian Cage caught him in like a jackhammer position and transitioned it into a big slam. It was an unbelievable feat of strength. The finish came when Sydal had all the momentum, knocked Brian Cage down, went up the top looking for the big shooting star press, and then it was maybe the biggest botch of the night. As he went for the shooting star press, Cage was going to counter it with a knee or a foot in the air to catch him on the way down, but Sydal botched it anyway. He clipped the top turnbuckle with his feet on the way down and face planted the canvas. It was really nasty. Cage scooped him up, hit his finisher for the win, and is the new X Division champion. I should point out that commentary did an excellent job of not pretending that the shooting star press wasn't botched. They went, oh, Sydal's clipped the ropes there. And you can kind of play it off as Sydal being all arrogant and cocky as the heel in the match. So I quite enjoyed that. Commentary did a good job of not masking the mistake, but almost making it all right by calling attention to it. And I think it's an interesting move to have Brian Cage as the X Division champion. Who could possibly take the title from him, since he's so much bigger than all of his opponents in the division? Next up, the Knockouts Championship match between the champion, Su Yung, who's kind of if you've never seen her before, kind of like the female Undertaker. She's got undead brides with her. She comes out in a coffin. It's all really cool, really atmospheric stuff. And she's got the charisma to really pull it off. Against Madison Rayne, a true legend of the Impact Knockouts division, and I think a 5-time Knockouts champion, going for her 6th in this match. Ultimately, this was maybe my least favourite match on the card. It wasn't brilliant by any stretch of the imagination. It was also very short. It may have been the shortest match of Slammiversary. I think it was only about 5 minutes long, and it was really all about putting Su Yung over as the new future of the Impact Knockouts division, which I totally understand. Apparently, I've read a few things online saying that Madison Rayne may be rumoured for the Mae Young Classic, and especially with such a decisive victory for Su Yung here, it seems as though this could have been Madison Rayne's big send-off, her big farewell. As I mentioned, Su Yung picked up a fairly comprehensive victory. She also really bossed the match in terms of presence. She came out in the casket with the brides, and after defeating Madison Rayne and retaining her Knockouts Championship, she then put Madison Rayne in the casket, closed the lid, and Madison Rayne was kind of ceremoniously carried to the back, maybe never to be seen again in Impact Wrestling. Next up, the second hardcore match of the night, the 5150 street fight between Lax Ortiz and Santana with their manager Conan against the Ogs Hernandez and Homicide with their manager Eddie Kingston, one of my favourite promo guys in the business, and an excellent wrestler in his own right too, but he was just a manager for this match and had all the charisma and all of the presence that you'd expect from such an experienced veteran of promos. If you've never seen any of Eddie Kingston's promos, really check out his work in Chikara particularly, where in sort of a cartoonish fun promotion, he was a very intense, brooding figure and actually worked really well. Speaking of intense, this match was also very, very intense, and that's really good because, at least for the first half of it, I found it to be quite sloppy and trashy. There were a lot of tables and weapons strewn all over the place, but it really worked at the same time. You know, the crowd were ready to see a big brawl, and that's exactly what they got. As I mentioned, the first half of the match was maybe a little bit messy in parts, but it really got more crisp towards the end, which I was surprised about because you'd expect the older guys, especially Hernandez and Homicide, to maybe start to gas a little bit, and even though they did look a bit tired later on, they did not let that intensity drop one little bit. Obviously, they've been taking lessons from my boy, Scott Steiner. Holla if you hear me, let's do some maths, haha. I'm so, I'm so sad. Can you see the pain in my eyes? I'm devastated. Look at me. What am I doing? I'm sorry, Mum. I didn't mean for it to go this way. These sunglasses are too tight as well. It's really hurting my ears. Eventually, the finish came when the OGs looked to have the match won, but then they were distracted by Conan, who got on the apron, stopped them from finishing the match, and then sneakily tossed a bag of thumbtacks to one of his boys, who emptied it into the ring. They hit a big move on the thumbtacks, and LAX picked up the victory. I was surprised. I thought as the big returning guys, Hernandez and Homicide, the big heels, would pick up the victory, but no, they didn't. LAX picked up the win and retained the tag team championship, but then afterwards the OGs got their revenge, doing a beatdown specifically on Conan, where they whipped him like a bloody dog. They whipped him with their belt. Disrespectful. The OGs then took spray paint cans and tagged the Impact Tag Team Championships with, I couldn't really make it out, but I think it said OG on each one. So that sort of means, I guess, that the feud's going to continue, and Hernandez and Homicide will probably get another chance to capture those shiny tag team titles. Next up, following that hardcore match, we had another hardcore match, and, well, not billed as a hardcore match, but it certainly turned into one. The hair versus mask match between Sami Callihan wagering his hair against Pentagon Jr. wagering his mask. Now, as intense as that tag team street fight was, I think the intensity of this match even eclipsed that. Pentagon and Sami Callihan, it got quite disgusting at points. By the end, Sami Callihan was just a slobbering mess. Both men were bloodied. Pentagon's mask was ripped. He was bleeding through the mask, and the red of his blood was staining the white of his mask. Visually, this match was awesome and very intense and quite difficult to watch if you're a bit squeamish, but at the same time was just a spectacle, a total spectacle. It reminded me of a big, intense sort of Lucha Underground match, like those Grave Consequences matches, or maybe even the Pentagon versus Vampiro death match that we saw, I think, at the end of season 1. This was obviously far from like a technical wrestling classic, but they had all the big set piece moments that make a match such as this so worthwhile. One of the ones I remember from early on was Sami Callihan taking a big chop from Pentagon, but he's wearing like Roman Reigns body armor, and Sami goes, you know what, no, go for it, chop my chest, undoes his zip. Pentagon chops him right in the chest, very hot. It sounded like a gunshot going off, and Sami Callihan sold it and then went, no, enough of that, zipped up his body armor again and kept it there for the rest of the match. That was very funny. Another one I remember as well is Sami Callihan throwing powder into the face of Pentagon, blinding him, and then Pentagon accidentally broke the arm of the referee, thinking that it was Sami Callihan, and then obviously Pentagon got the clean visual pinfall, but the referee couldn't count because his arm was broken. Eventually another ref hit the ring, and Pentagon picked up the victory after a big cradle pile driver onto like a collection of 6 chairs they sort of were stood upon, like a little makeshift platform. It was very intense, a fittingly intense finish to a very bloody and at times difficult to watch match, and then we had some afters as well, lovely stuff. OVE made themselves known midway through the match, but Pentagon dealt with them fairly easily, but they did have a part to play in the post-match aftermath. Pentagon was looking to obviously shave Sami Callihan's head, but OVE jumped him and seemed to save the day for their heel boss. But they played a nice little double bluff on us because it looked like Sami was going to escape, and then Fenix, Pentagon's brother, came out, ushered Sami back into the clutches of Pentagon, and he did indeed get his head shaved, but it looked alright. You know, he looked nicer without that long ratty hair, so well done, Sami. Good decision to lose this match, mate. You look lovely now. Wonderful. Better than I do currently. And finally, the main event of the evening, the match we'd all been waiting for at Moose-iversary. That's right, Moose taking on Austin Aries for the Impact World Championship. Now, I was worried about this match because after the excellent undercard, it had a hell of a lot to live up to. And also, I had no idea how good or bad the chemistry between a larger, less experienced guy like Moose and a smaller, more experienced veteran like Austin Aries would really go down. As luck would have it, both men brought their absolute A-game throughout this match. Really going for it, really, you know, working a really good wrestling match with each other. Moose showed some nimbleness and some agility that I've never seen from him before. And I worked in a wrestling promotion for a year and a half, and we often booked Moose. And I've never seen him wrestle quite as well as he did in this match. He really brought it all. Austin Aries was at his best, which is really good because when Austin Aries is at his best, he is one of the best wrestlers in North America. So they were really putting on an excellent match. There was little sort of outside interference, little sort of bull crap. And yeah, it was just a really solid match. There was some good psychology throughout. Austin Aries was often going for the count-out win. Moose was dragging him back into the ring. They threw each other into the crowd at points. It kept that characteristic intensity that really helped spice up Slammiversary throughout the card from start to finish. Eventually, though, the ending came when Austin Aries got his belt and tried to use it to get himself disqualified. The referee went, no, don't do that. And then the special belt holder, and I've forgotten his name sadly, but I know he's a professional baseball player for the Toronto Blue Jays. He sort of snatched the belt from Austin Aries. Aries turned around, but then the referee was all caught up in the mix as well, and basically Aries was able to hit the brainbuster and pick up the victory over Moose. I was absolutely devastated. I thought Moose was going to win this, especially because I can't really see who the next babyface challenger for Aries is going to be. But to be honest, the match was good enough that it didn't really put too much of a dampener on the show, having a big heel victory at the end. So yeah, maybe this wasn't Moose's time, and maybe because there aren't many challengers to come for Austin Aries, Moose is going to get another chance and hopefully scoop that title in November at Bound for Glory. Another interesting thing to note as well is that Bound for Glory is going to take place in New York City, which is a great return for Impact to a very prominent wrestling town. So on the whole, I guess this show was a very impressive one from Impact, one of the best Impact pay-per-views I can ever remember seeing from start to finish. There was loads of entertaining stuff, and crucially, all the entertaining things were entertaining in a different way. We had hardcore stuff, we had flippy stuff, we had just a really solid, psychology-filled, excellent wrestling match between Moose and Austin Aries. We had the intense street fight, we had Allie and Tessa Blanchard pulling it all out of the bag. It was really a fantastic show, and I'd highly recommend watching it if you didn't catch it live tonight. So that's all for now. Thank you very much. I've been Jack Steiner from Cultaholic.com. I'm going to be wearing this for the rest of the week, and oh, wonderful stuff as well. I'm going to be doing my CM Punk punishment this week, so I'm going to have to cut CM Punk promos in public while dressed as Scotty Boy Steiner. Oh, good lord. Thank you very much for watching. You can follow me on Twitter if you want, at Jack the Jobber. You can follow all of us at Cultaholic, and if you want to as well, you can check out our Patreon too, patreon.com/Cultaholic. And never forget, of course, to holler if you hear me and to join us.